I met my first leader, someone who changed my life, my first encounter with a leader, when I was 16 years old. Remember when you were 16? Very vulnerable. And this person did all the things that I would go on to my entire life to look at. Leaders, he took risks, he faced challenges, he wasn't afraid of change. And I spent my life following leaders, and I think back to that moment because this guy did it all. The problem was that he took a risk, and his risk was on me. For him, it was great. It turned out for me to be the most humiliating moment of my life, and probably the greatest failure of my life. Thank you. I was 16, and our school was participating in the one-act play festival across the province. Big deal. We were very, very competitive, and students would direct a one-act play. I was selected to direct the play. But my teacher had been teaching us about Edward Albee. Remember the Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire. I was 16, and I thought those are good plays, but I think I could probably do better. Why not? So I said to the teacher, hey, sir, do you mind not only if I direct the play, but do you mind if I write it too? There was a kind of a long, long silence as he considered, should he put the reputation of the school and his reputation on the line? And he said, yes, if you feel like that's what you want to do, go for it. So I did. I wrote this play, and it was called The Royal Bed. This is actually a copy of it. I just dug it up. 20 minutes. I worked so hard on it. It's the story of Henry Churchill, a psychiatrist who's got a deep, dark secret, and his wife, Elizabeth Churchill, royal bed. It takes place in their bedroom. They have a son. And it was really great. I cast my best friends. I worked for 3 months. It was very, very dramatic. And we mounted the play. 500 people in an auditorium. Over 3 days. Plays, schools are putting them on. And after every play, there's an adjudicator, a judge that comes out and says, this is good, this is bad. We finished our play. And I was sitting there, my girlfriend, my best friends, my family, my teachers. I was very proud. By the way, it was significantly better than Edward Albee. And the adjudicator, who must have sat through a lot of crappy theater and didn't know who wrote it, said this: that is the worst play I have ever seen in my life. And I was kind of stunned, thinking, is he talking about my play? And he said, and trust me when I tell you I remember these lines, my first tattoo on my brain, he said, the actors did their best to lift the words off the page, but it proved impossible. Then he proceeded to perform what can only be described as an autopsy on a living body, me. Some of the sentences he thought he had won the crowd. The crowd, for the first time, was actually engaged in something. And he decided to read out bits that I thought were dramatic, I mean, on par with Albee and Williams. But it turned out they were actually more Mel Brooks. They turned out to be high comedy. So he read excerpts from my play, which I'd worked so hard on, like this. Elizabeth, someone your father knows, a Dr. Joseph Stern. What was his name? Henry Miller. Steve Miller. I guess I was listening to Steve Miller at the time. Oh, the crowd roared. I sat there for what appeared to be about an hour and a half, but it was probably about 8 minutes as he finished. People were glancing over at me as if I had contracted leprosy and my nose was falling off, and I just sat there. At the end of this, people came up to me, are you okay? Someone rushed to the stage. Do you know a 16-year-old boy wrote that play? He said, oh my God, I didn't know. I walked backstage. I wanted to be alone to cry. And my teacher, he was a stern young man, and he was a young teacher. And that year, he and his wife had lost a child at 8.5 months, stillborn, a boy. And they'd been through a rough time. And he wasn't a man of great, then, emotion. And he went backstage, and he said, Solomon? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I'm proud of you like my son. And he just lost his son. And then he walked away. And then I burst into tears. And at that moment, I had an epiphany. And I thought, it will never get worse than this. When you try something new, when you take a risk, you will be totally and utterly humiliated. And I saw it very clearly. I will never do this again because it can't get worse. And then I thought to myself, at the very same moment, it is bad, but it's not that bad. I mean, if this is what we're all so afraid of, this is what failure looks like, it's not horrible. Plus, the guy who I admired just said he was proud of me like his son. And then I thought to myself, no, I can do that. And I've spent the rest of my life, over 30 years since that moment, doing exactly what I did that day. Putting myself out there, writing books, publishing magazines, hosting television shows, betting on myself. And that, for me, was the seminal moment of my educational life. Absolutely crucial. But the true story is, years later, the real story of leadership wasn't about me at all. It was about him. The true story was, why did he take that risk? Why did he risk the reputation of his school and his reputation on a precocious, arrogant, and now I can say it, no talented playwright to do that? He knew something, and I've been trying to figure out for 30 years what makes leaders, when they're faced with a moment of choice and change and risk, choose it and not back away. Because we are in a moment now where we have a leadership crisis. A poll recently by ECO showed that our political leaders, only 9% of the population trust our leaders. 9% trust our leaders to actually solve the problems that we're faced with. And we are faced with an enormous array of problems. Social problems, economic problems, environmental problems. The complexity facing our leaders is enormous. 9% of people actually believe that our leaders can solve that. More people would let Justin Bieber do laser eye surgery on their baby than would let a political leader do anything. I mean, it's extraordinary. These are comical lows. And it's a crisis because unless we figure out how to work together to solve some problems, we've got a crisis, and leaders have a crisis. And so what I'll do in the next couple of minutes is outline exactly what we're afraid of. Why are we risk averse? What are leaders not doing? Why do some leaders act and some don't? Well, partly because there's a fear of change. Just as a hands up, how many people are comfortable with the pace of change? They can keep up with the pace of change. There's one guy in the back. There's always a guy on me. Sounds like a man. I can do it. I asked Bill Gates that once. I said, I thought he's a pretty good guy. If you've made $70 billion, you usually have something to say. And he said, I can't keep up. So good luck to you, buddy. I'll get back to that. It's tough to keep up. There's a whole industry that evangelizes fear of change. They say your skills are out of date, your knowledge is out of date, you can't keep up. When you get old, you're going to be redundant. If you're not part of the bulldozer, you're part of the road. Oh, it's a war on time. And so you make decisions about your future based on fear. Now, nobody makes good decisions based on fear. So let me give you a quick reading of what change might be, and a better way that I've seen leaders who approach it successfully. One, change is not predatory. Change is not, the story of change has never been a new thing, a new technology, a new idea coming along and destroying an old one. Change is a new idea coming along and forcing an old idea to discover its deeper efficiency. The discovery of deep efficiency is the story of profound change. And that can be very disruptive, make no mistake about it. But it's important to understand. I'll do a couple quick examples. Remember, in the old days, there was radio. People had a radio room, and the family would gather around and listen to the radio, and the father would say, shut up to the kids, and the kids would actually listen a long time ago. Then television came, and it was more efficient. It was what they call kinesthetic, your ears and your eyes, and people said the radio's dead. But radio didn't die. It moved to a more efficient medium in the car. Radio, very efficient in the car. Television, not so much. Newspapers, everyone's worried that newspapers are going to die, right? The internet's going to destroy newspapers. Oh, I don't read the newspaper anymore. But newspapers, remember, their old efficiency was what was new went into the paper, the morning edition, the afternoon, and the night edition. Now we know the information is not that new because you get it online. The newspaper's deep efficiency is not news, it's meaning. Nobody reads the newspaper to find out what happens. We read the newspaper to find out what it means. What does it mean that there's a civil war in Iraq? What does it mean that the market's tanked? The highest paid person at the New York Times, Thomas Friedman, a columnist. Why? He sells meaning. The Finding the deep efficiency is about the change between importance and value. When something becomes abundant, it loses value. It doesn't mean it's not important. How many people here, hands up, can use a pen and pencil to make squiggly lines? Are literate? Hands up. I mean, we still have 5 million illiterate people in Canada, which is a tragedy. But most of us here can do it, right? But how many of you, when you apply to jobs, say, am good with pen and pencil, hard and soft, you know, training on eraser, excellent on liquid paper. Very important, no value. No value. Very important, no value. Values and importance are shifting very profoundly in a disruptive, and leaders understand that, and they discover the deep efficiency. One example of this is FedEx. Who knows what FedEx is? Just yell it out. What company? What do they do? Package delivery, right. It's a very famous Harvard study. So how do you become the best shipping company? Well, what's our deep efficiency? Package delivery. They famously said it. So their old motto, faster, better, cheaper. Got to be faster. So they invested in planes, 4th largest plane fleet in the world. New trucks. Everyone, they got great trucks and great planes. Very important, but they reach what's called technological parity. Everyone can buy planes. Purelator can buy planes, and they did. They can't drive trucks on the road. Excuse me, officer, I'm with FedEx. I'll be going 200. You know, no. Everyone had it. So they invested in technology, no market share advantage. So what did they do? They cut staff. Invest in technology, got to cut people. So now you've got a big investment in technology, fewer staff, but everyone did the same thing. Then, very important, no added value. Then what did they do? They cut overnight delivery time. 11 a.m., 10 a.m., 9 a.m., 8 a.m., 7 a.m. Heavy investment in technology, smaller staff, tighter deadlines, no value advantage. Still important, no value, because everyone did it. Finally, what do? You cut price, right? $15.99, $14.99, $12.99, $9.99, $7.99 overnight delivery. Heavy investment technology, smaller staff, tighter deadlines, lower margins, no value. Then very famously, someone said in FedEx, you know what, we're not in the package delivery business. I'm sorry, you were wrong. Our deep efficiency, anxiety relief. If I'm sending you a package from Montreal to Toronto and you're anxious about it, that's why you FedEx it, but you don't want the relationship between the sender and the receiver to be severed because it's a trust issue. You're anxious about the package. So they installed a little package tracking device, a GPS, very simple. Didn't help move the package. Where's the package? Oh, it's in Kingston at a Tim Hortons. But it was in Ottawa at a Tim Hortons. Oh, the guy likes Tim Hortons, but they're moving. And a huge value change. People trust it. And what did FedEx do? They famously changed their logo from what? Faster, better, cheaper to relax. It's FedEx. Because it's important that they had the best supply chain and management, but the value was the relationship between the package and the customer. And they realized the deep efficiency in a time of change was trust. And everyone does that. Bill Gates, I'll return to him. I met him in February in Waterloo. Who that? If you had $70 billion, just with all due respect to Waterloo, would you be there in February? I suggest you would have options. But anyway, I actually asked Gates, what are you doing here? He said they gave me a free sweatshirt. What do you get? The man who has everything. I said, what are you doing here? He said, I'll tell you why I'm here. I used to be the innovator-in-chief, and I had the largest collection of millionaires in the world. And we used to think, I wrote a book called The Road Ahead. We don't predict the future at Microsoft, we invent it. And then I missed Google and Yahoo and YouTube and Twitter. These are big misses, folks. And he said, I left because my deep efficiency is to be the recruiter-in-chief, to inspire young, he said, someone in this audience, there's 300 young engineers in Waterloo, for me to come here, one of these kids is either going to start a company like Zuckerberg in a garage and disrupt my business, work for my competitor, or work with me. Not for me, by the way, with me. He realized, he didn't know what the future was, but the best asset was to inspire people to bring risk within. He couldn't predict the future. It was moving too fast, so he brought it within his walls. And that's why he travels all around the world to schools to try to find that young person to bet on, because he's so terrified that he'll miss. Remember, he tried to buy Yahoo for $45 billion. So what do leaders do? They discover the deep efficiency. It's usually about a relationship. But how do you do it in a time of trust? And this is important for leaders, and I see this for leaders all over. How do they flip it from 9 to 90% of trust? I go back to the greatest leader. 1945, after World War II, Marshall. Do you remember the Marshall Plan? Whatever the weather, we must move together. Imagine Europe, 50 million people from Japan to Europe dead. The Americans have won, but they've lost hundreds of thousands. Europe is in ashes. They loathe each other, 2 world wars. And someone said to Marshall, how are you going to rebuild? And you know what Marshall says? I don't know. I don't know how to rebuild Japan, or Germany, and England, and France, and Belgium, and the next. I don't know how, but I do know why. I do know why. And the Marshall Plan was based on Marshall saying, if you give people a why, they will figure out the how. And the Marshall Plan was a great communication. He convinced Americans to spend their tax dollars to rebuild what was Nazi Germany. And he convinced the French and the Germans to work together after they'd slaughtered each other. And he convinced the Brits to be part of it. And he said, the Brits will figure out what's good for them. I don't know how. They have their own culture. And so do the Germans and the French and the Japanese. Everyone does. But the why is important. And Marshall became what he called a keeper of the why. He said, you know, we're going to fail on the how all the time. Sometimes programs won't work. It doesn't matter. They'll figure it out. How fails all the time. Bad leaders focus on the how, he said. And they get caught up in the failures of the how. Great leaders are keepers of the why in times of change. And I will say this, the leaders that I've run into, the great leaders, they don't shy away from risk, and they don't focus on how with little programs and little dreams. They focus on the why, and they unleash the power of the how on the ground up. We are in a crisis because our leaders are risk averse. I mean, by the way, the risk aversion is not just political leadership. Even in our education system, we're so scared of failure that we standardize tests to control variables, teach for the test. We're so terrified we control the how, we forget about the why. And the why is important. We need leaders who are keepers of the why to bring us together to go from 9% trust to 90% so we can confront the great challenges like Marshall got us to do. That's what leadership in a time of change is all about. They are the keepers of the why, and that is a scarce commodity. And I learned that day when I was 16, when I had a teacher who said, I don't know how this kid's going to do this. He's probably going to fail. But I know why I should let him. Because my deep efficiency as a teacher is to build character, is to believe in someone. And I learned about the why. I failed on the how that day, but I learned that it didn't matter because I learned about the why. And so I'll end today by telling you what happened to that teacher. That teacher, his name is Jeff Roberts. He went on to become the headmaster of this very school where I attended. And this year, after 36 years of teaching, and teaching kids about the why, he's retiring. And so I want to say today, after spending 30 years looking at great leaders, the first leader I met is still the greatest leader. And I want to thank him for teaching me about the why, to be fearless in the face of the how. I'd like to call Jeff Roberts out, and I know he's here somewhere. Jeff. And I want to say this. I just want to say, I am proud as a son. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.